Hello again. I've mentioned this publication by David Reed before, Jehovah's Witness Literature. It's excellent and always offers something of value about virtually every publication the Watchtower had put out up until the 1990s. And here's a summation as a kind of a sample of how Reed summarizes the pith of the book. Here it's about the 1975 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses. I do remember this as being maybe the only publication with significant amounts of JW history in it between the Divine Purpose book in the late 50s and the Proclaimer's book in the early 90s. The 75 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, 1974 it was published. David Reed says, although annual yearbooks have been produced throughout most of this century and feature histories of the witnesses' activities in various countries, as well as Bible verses and discussions for daily devotions during the designated year, only those yearbooks of special significance are listed and discussed here. The 1975 yearbook is of interest because it contains a 223-page history of Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States. While the discussions of the sect's activities in foreign countries found in the yearbooks of other years consist largely of anecdotes about missionaries and how they won over local people, the 1975 yearbook story of the sect in the United States naturally deals with its origin and its organizational development over the years. Although the account is totally one-sided as a propaganda piece for God's organization, there is much of value to learn from it, especially when other versions of the same events are available for comparison and contrast. This yearbook provides enough information, for example, to establish that the Watchtower movement began not as a divine creation raised up by God to restore true Christianity, but rather as a schismatic faction that broke away from a Second Adventist splinter group in 1879 when Charles Taze Russell resigned as an assistant editor of the Adventist magazine The Herald of the Morning and began publishing his own magazine, Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence. Although surrounded with sugar-coated explanations, an admission is also found here that Watchtower followers had expected that in the year 1925, quote, the remnant of Christ's anointed followers would go to heaven to be part of the kingdom, and that the faithful men of old, such as Abraham, David, and others, would be resurrected as princes to take over the government of the earth as part of God's kingdom. That's a quote from governing body member Albert Schroeder on page 146 of the 1975 yearbook. The yearbook account tries to pass off the failed expectations as originating with the readers rather than with the writers of Watchtower literature. It quotes an unidentified Anna MacDonald as saying, concerning many brothers, that instead of its being considered a probability, they read into it that it was a certainty. That's also on page 146 of the yearbook. But an examination of what the Watchtower Society actually published in 1920 reveals that the expectations for 1925 did not have to be read into the material because they were spelled out in black and white. Quote, therefore we may confidently expect that 1925 will mark the return of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the faithful prophets of old. That's millions now living will never die, pages 89 and 90 of the 1920 edition. By the way, he has a very good section on that particular book in here as well. I think we've dealt with that one before. Released toward the end of 1974, the 1975 yearbook continues to raise expectations for the autumn of 1975. Referring to the book Life Everlasting in Freedom of the Sons of God, which had been released in 1966, the yearbook offers these comments, quote, the chronological chart identified 1975 as the end of the 6th 1,000-year day of man's existence in the early autumn. This certainly raised questions. Does this mean that Babylon the Great will go down by 1975? Will Armageddon be over, with Satan bound by then? It could, acknowledged F.W. Franz, the Watchtower Society's vice president, after posing similar questions at the God's Sons of Liberty District Assembly in Baltimore, Maryland. However, he added, in essence, quote, quoting Fred Franz again, but we are not saying all things are possible with God. But we are not saying, and don't any of you be specific in saying anything that is going to happen between now and 1975. But the big point of all of this is, dear friends, and that's a definite Fred Franz phrase, the big point of all of this is, friends, dear friends, time is short. Time is running out. No question about that. And that's from page 256 in the 1975 yearbook. And then David Reed concludes his section on this yearbook. Also of interest are the pictures inside the front and back covers showing some of the Watchtower's multi-million-dollar real estate holdings, as well as panoramic photographs of Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds, packed with more than 250,000 people back in 1958, the last time Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide tried to assemble for their annual convention in a single city. So that's Jehovah's Witness Literature, a critical guide to Watchtower publications. Everybody serious about witnessing to their families should have this, one of David Reed's best books, and they're all good. See you next time.